now, go. Hello, welcome to The View from Israel. I'm Barry Shaw. The clock's ticking. It's less than now 2 months to the all-important presidential and congressional elections in the United States and their implications for Israel. Today, my special guest is Mark Zell, international lawyer. Mark is also the chairman of the Republicans Overseas and also a vice president, of the Republicans Overseas and the chairman of the Republican Overseas Israel. Mark, welcome to The View from Israel.
Great to be with you, Barry. Thanks for having me.
Tell me, what are the procedures for Americans living abroad, how to register their votes, both in the presidential race and also in the congressional?
That's a great question.
It's a deadline.
That's a great question. We are really at the height of the registration process here in Israel. We'll be able to go registering people probably through mid-October. The process involves, first, as I indicated, registration. Everybody that's here in Israel that is a United States citizen, for most part, can register, typically in the place where they last resided before coming to Israel. And for those that never resided in the United States, who we call second-generation Americans who were born here in Israel and never lived in the U.S., they can vote in the place where either of their U.S. citizen parents was able to vote or last resided. And if you have two U.S. parents, you have two choices. And if one, you just have one. And that involves sending in something called a federal postcard application, which allows, under federal law, all U.S. citizens located abroad, residing abroad, to be able to vote in federal elections, that is for president, Senate, and Congress. And so once you fill in register by sending in your federal postcard application online, or in some cases, you have to also mail it in, then that same postcard allows you to request an absentee ballot. And the absentee ballot is typically sent to the applicant by email. That's going to be happening the next 2 weeks, basically. The states will start sending out absentee ballots by email primarily. And then, excuse me, then when you receive your absentee ballot, you fill it out, you follow the various requirements, all of which differ from state to state. We have to know the laws of 51 jurisdictions at least. And then you fill out the ballot, you put it in the envelope, you sign it according to the state law requirements, and then you need to get it back to your election board in the United States, typically in the county or in the city or township in which you are entitled to vote. And at that point, the law requires the state to count the absentee ballot, regardless of how close the election is in a particular jurisdiction. And that's it. And I just will mention the year 2000, when Bush, the son, was running against Al Gore for the presidency, the election came down to 537 votes in 3 counties in southern Florida. And in Israel, voters here cast 1,200 votes in those various counties, and thus helped to determine the outcome of the presidential election in the year 2000.
I think a number of people are watching us right now and very interested. So where do these people obtain these forms from? Where do they get the forms and the absentee ballot? Do they get it?
Sure.
They have to get it from the United States, and how is it mailed out? Slow mail, snail mail, or how quickly or how slowly will they get them?
Well, the registration process, as I think I indicated, is carried out online, and the folks that are watching us today can get this information and register and request their ballots through this website, www.fvap.gov. That's F as in France, V as in Victor, A America, P Portugal.gov. That is a federal government website that's run by the Pentagon, interestingly. And that website will give you all the information you need and the instructions you need to register, request your ballot. And once you do that, you will receive your ballot typically by email, in some cases by snail mail. And then, as I said, you fill out the ballot, you get it back in accordance with the written procedures for that state, which will be sent to you when you get your ballot. And you're in business. You voted.
If it's online, then it can be done online. But if they're getting the forms by snail mail, they have to fill it in and send it back by regular mail or express mail. Correct?
Right. So yeah. So let me say this again so that we're clear. Almost all states permit registration online. Okay. Some states will also permit registration by email or fax. A very few number of states will require the application, the federal postcard application, to register and to request a ballot to be sent in by regular mail or by international courier. That can also be used. And in fact, here in Israel, we made a special arrangement with one of the international couriers to reduce the price for voting in the election. In any case, that's one phase. That's the first phase. Once that's been done, you then wait to get your actual absentee ballot from the state in which you are registered. That will happen, as I said, under federal law within the next 2 weeks, around September 20th, something like that. Everybody that's registered should be receiving an absentee ballot by email. Okay. Now, and sometimes they send it by snail mail if you don't have if you didn't request it to be sent by email. The snail mail is a problem because right now the air connections between Israel and the rest of the world have been severely truncated due to the war, and that's why it's a very dangerous thing to be using snail mail to receive your absentee ballot. Now, let me just say this. Let's say you've registered. You've done everything you need to do to register in the state where you're entitled to vote. If you don't get your absentee ballot in a relatively reasonable period of time, that is between the mid or end of September and mid-October, you can still vote by absentee ballot, even if you haven't received it. And that's because the law provides for something called a federal write-in absentee ballot. The federal write-in absentee ballot, you can download yourself from the internet, from the same site that I gave you that's run by the government. You can fill it out, vote for the candidates in your state, at president, vice president, Senate, if you're having a Senate election, and for your congressional district, whenever that is. And then you can send that in, and that will be counted, even if you didn't get an official ballot from the state. So the system that's been set up under the federal law allows everybody to register to vote, request a ballot, and vote, even if you don't get an absentee ballot from your home state.
Why is it not possible then for, let's say, for instance, voters, Americans here in America, to lodge their votes at the United States Embassy or consulate in Tel Aviv?
You mean, is it possible for voters here in Israel to submit their votes to the embassy or consulate?
Yes, either to the consulate or to the U.S. Embassy in the country that the voter will be living?
The answer to that is no. There is a theoretical possibility of being able to drop off your ballots after you receive them and fill them out in accordance with the procedure that I just described, but the embassy itself advises against that because they can't guarantee that they will be able to have enough room in their diplomatic pouches to carry the ballots back to the United States. So therefore we recommend that people do not make use of the consulate. There was a time when then it was actually possible to go to the embassy or consulate and vote, but they've stopped doing that, unfortunately, and so we're on our own.
Okay, let me ask you this question then. Do you have to know how many Americans, for instance, here in Israel are eligible to vote?
We know from the State Department that they gave us this information last year that there are a total of 750,000 United States citizens in Israel. However, and so we've made a rough uh, guesstimate about the number of eligible voters. Those are the voters who are over the age of 18, and that we're estimating about 500,000 United States citizens in Israel are eligible to vote.
Have you any idea, in particular Israel, how that is split between Democrat-siding people and Republicans?
Yes, this is something that's really interesting, Barry. Let me just tell you that, as you know, in the United States, the Jewish community there votes overwhelmingly Democratic, between 70 to 80% every year. The opposite is true here in Israel. It wasn't always that way, but I can tell you that since 1991, when I started Republicans Overseas in Israel, something like 80% of Israeli voters, Israeli American voters here, vote Republican. And this year, our estimates, based on the kind of feedback that we're getting, are that number may exceed 90% after the events of October 7th and its aftermath. So that's a complete opposite. It's an anomaly in the Jewish world. And it's one of the reasons why the Trump campaign just yesterday reached out to me to see if they can work with us to help increase the number of Jewish American citizens here in Israel to register and to vote.
Which leads me, I guess, on to the next question is how do you and your role as the chairman of the Republicans Israel reach out to American voters, potential voters over here, and what message you give to the American voters to vote Republican, at least those in Israel?
Well, first, let me say that in our registration efforts and outreach to the voters here in Israel, we don't try to persuade them to vote Republican or Democrat. And the reason is most of them, just by force of nature and good common sense, are voting Republican. So we register everybody, or Democratic, Republican. We don't ask what their preferences are. But how do we reach these people? That's the real good question, Barry. And that's what we're doing right now. For just last week, for example, we have a list of 200,000 roughly. We call them first generation Americans. Those are American citizens who lived in the United States and then emigrated to Israel. So we have a list of those people, and we've sent out both by SMS and by email a message encouraging each of them to vote, and it's had a really tremendous response. We also reach out to them in other ways. For example, today in Jerusalem, we had two major registration events at private homes in which we advertised, and we've gotten, again, a huge response coming to each of the registration venues. We're going to be doing meetings like this all over the country in areas where there are large American populations, such as Jerusalem, we just mentioned, Beit Shemesh, here in Judea and Samaria and Efrat and Ma'ale Adumim, and other parts of Gush Etzion where I live, in Binyamin, Karnei Shomron, and etc. Also across on the other side of the Green Line, that is in places like Zivron Yaakov and Ra'anana, and in parts of Herzliya and Tel Aviv, Beersheba, we have divided the country into roughly 50 precincts, for which we've appointed team leaders or precinct captains in each of the precincts, and they are helping the voters in their particular geographic districts relocate them and register and so on. A lot of this happens by word of mouth, happens by social media, it happens by these direct communications that I mentioned to you through names that we have here. It is also a lot of it's by word of mouth. We have, I appear, as I did just a couple hours ago, on Israeli television, and other members of our team appear and call upon Americans across the country to register and vote. You know, sometimes, just like today, I was in Efrat and walked into a new store, and there were two young ladies, my daughter's ages, and I overheard them speaking English. I asked them if they're Americans. They said they were, and sure enough, I picked up two new voters. One from Texas, where there's a very crucial Senate race going on to reelect Senator Ted Cruz, and also from Illinois, which is a blue state. And let me just say, if I can, Barry, one important thing about uh, voters from states which are either very blue, that is, they're very democratic, or very red, they're very Republican. A lot of people here think, well, since I come from one of those states, my vote doesn't matter. Okay, the voters back in my blue or red state are going to vote who they're going to vote for. The electoral votes for my state are going to go for whatever color the state is, and that's it. Well, it's just pointless for me to vote. And one of the things I point out to them, and this is extremely important, is that it's not just about how the electoral college goes. Of course, there are about 7 swing states like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Nevada, and Arizona, and North Carolina. These states are swing states, and they could go either way depending how the vote goes. And of course, the actual vote in those states, including our votes from in Israel, could determine the outcome of the election in that state, and hence the election of the president. But it's true that the national vote does not pick a president under the U.S. Constitution. However, as we learned in 2016, Barry, when Hillary Clinton lost to Donald Trump in the Electoral College, she received 2.5 million more popular votes nationally. And this was used by the Democrats, by Clinton herself, and by the media and so on, to attempt to delegitimize the presidency of Donald Trump between 2016 and 2021. And that is what we're trying to avoid here. In other words, if everyone votes, regardless of the color of the state that they come from, and even if you're not in a swing state, that national popular vote is extremely important. Right now, according to the polls, Donald Trump is up by 1% nationally over Kamala Harris. That's a big, big number. And we would like to increase that from 1 to 2, maybe to 3% nationally. That would virtually assure Donald Trump not only of the Electoral College, but also of legitimacy in the eyes of those who put a lot of stock in the national popular vote. And one other point. This election, Barry, you pointed out this yourself in your opening remarks, is not just about the White House. It's also about the control of Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives. In many states, particularly this term, the many Democratic senators are up for re-election in states which are largely Republican. A good example would be Sherrod Brown, the senator from Ohio. Ohio is a solid Republican state these days, but Sherrod Brown is a left-wing Democrat, and therefore his seat is vulnerable. Same is true in Pennsylvania, a swing state, where Bob Casey, the senator, is running against Dave McCormick, a Republican. That state is very close. Right now, the Senate, as your viewers may know, is evenly divided between Republicans and Democrats, giving the vice president, that's Kamala Harris, a casting vote. And so that when the Senate is divided 50-50 or equally between the parties, she can break the tie. And that's what she's done. We know, many of our viewers know that she's done that many times, probably more times than any other vice president in history. She's done that basically to give the Democrats the victory in the Senate. So the Senate's this election cycle, the many Senate races are up for grabs, and we know one that's going to go. It's going to flip to the Republican side. That's West Virginia. It's going to go from Senator Manchin to Senator Governor Justice, and so that's going to automatically even things up or give the Republicans a little advantage in the Senate. And there was a few other seats, like I mentioned, Pennsylvania, Ohio, in Montana. according to the polls now, it's looking like we're going to flip that seat from John Tester to Tim Sheehy, giving the Republicans yet another vote. And then there are other Senate races which are the Republican incumbents, and which they are being challenged by strong Democratic contenders like Ted Cruz against Congressman Allred in Texas, or even in Florida, where Senator Rick Scott's up for re-election, is running against a woman whose name I don't recall, and she's shown herself very close. And then you have a totally blue state like my home state of Maryland, where the former governor, Larry Hogan, who's a Republican, is running against a newcomer called Alsobrook, an anti-Israel, pro-Hamas left-wing candidate. And that race is also very close and could go either way and could flip to the Republicans. That's the Senate. And then in the House, where the Republicans have the slimmest of majorities at the moment, nobody knows how that's going to turn out, because there are 435 seats up for a re-election, as there are every 2 years. And there are states in which, like California and New York, which Republicans won seats in 2022, which are in very deeply blue states. And the question is, will these congresspersons be able to be reelected in those states? Will the Democrats take those seats? Nobody knows. It's a complete completely imponderable at the moment, but it has a lot to do with how the presidential race goes. And if the presidential race goes strongly for the Republican, Donald Trump, there's a very good chance that he'll be able to carry the House with him, although by no means a certainty. So I'm sorry to have talked a long time, but you asked a complicated and an extremely important question, Barry. I hope I answered it.
Well, that's why I invited you on, because I knew you'd give us the detail. Okay, so, let me ask you a provocative question.
I love those.
Go ahead. What do you say to people living in the US that you should relinquish, any Americans living abroad, you should relinquish your vote, at least when it comes to the Senate and the House matters, because by moving to Israel or anywhere out of America, you've divorced yourself from local interests and local issues.
Well, first of all, I mean, there are many Israeli Americans here who do not divorce themselves from local interests and continue to maintain their ties to their home jurisdiction. But you're right, many people come here, and when they come here, their set of interests becomes more focused. And particularly Jewish voters over here become more keenly aware of the importance of the Jewish interest as a member of the Jewish people and as citizens of the state of Israel. And that's why Jews here tend to vote much differently in national elections than their compatriots back in the United States. For us, there's a reason why 80-90% of the Jews here are voting Republican, because the Republican Party has shown, unfortunately, this is the case, because I think bipartisan support for Israel is the desirable alternative, but that's not been the case for the past couple of decades. The Republican Party has remained a very loyal friend of the state of Israel and the Jewish people, while the Democratic Party, as we've seen, particularly in the last 5 to 10 years, has completely gone off the rails as it respects Israel, and by the way, a lot of other issues too. But for those of us that are focused primarily on Israel, then the Democratic Party has left us behind. That's why we're seeing so many. Let me just tell you, I don't know if your people are aware that there is a Democratic organization here in Israel for many years. It's very well financed. It's an integral part of the Democratic Party, much more integrated than we are in Republicans overseas. It's called Democrats Abroad. And as a result of the events of October 7th, the Democrats Abroad organization basically turned its back on what happened on October 7th. The entire board of Democrats Abroad resigned. The entire board of Democrats Abroad Israel resigned. And that was because of the direction their own Democratic Party has taken when it comes to Israel. I mean, you have presidential candidates going out and vice presidential candidates and many Congress people going out and supporting either strongly or more moderately those people that are just demonstrating all over the United States against Israel, against Zionism, against the Jewish people, and in favor of the Palestinians and Hamas terrorists. It's something unbelievable, as you all have, as many of your viewers have seen and are seeing day by day. So that is what it's one of the things that's happening here. The Jews in the United States, I don't know whether it's because of inertia or whatever, or just bad judgment, continue to support and will vote in large numbers for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz.
I'm going to give you some personal observation here. I mentioned it in an earlier show with Ambassador Yoram Ettinger, but I am concerned what you said about Democrats brought here in Israel and what they did. And I'm also concerned, quite frankly, about some of the actions of the American Jews who seem to have adopted a different form of Judaism from the one that you and I might have, which seems to be one of universal values and nothing to do with our issues of a nationhood. And I don't want to be too intellectual, Mark, but I quote a person called Stanislav Marie Adelaide. You probably haven't heard of this guy. He was a nobleman, a count de Clermont Tonnerre at the time of all things like the French Revolution. Now you'd say, what's that got to do with the Jews? Well, he brought up the constitution, if you want to call that, of France, of integrating everybody into an equitable France. But you know what this gentleman said about the Jews? He says in one sentence, I will put it, the Jews, for instance, we should refuse everything to the Jews as a nation and accord everything to the Jews as individuals so they would live with equality and fraternity within France. Now, if you can adopt this message of refuse everything to the Jews as a nation and accord everything to the Jews as individuals, my work of doing explanation to what is happening to the Jews in America who have turned their back on Israel is they have adopted the message of this French count from the French Revolution because they have adopted a Judaism which is strange to me, which is based on universal values and nothing to do with the traditions and the roots going back for 4,000 years of traditional Judaism. In other words, they've turned their back on the Jews as a nation. And I've just written an article, which is going to be on in a Jerusalem magazine in a week or two, pointing out the Jews as the indigenous people of the land of Israel. So Jews ourselves have our conflicts, particularly in America. And we see this in groups like J Street, supporting candidates like Kamala Harris and even the vice president, Walz, for instance, rather than a Republican candidate who may be very affirmative about Israel. Maybe you could show some light on that, agree or disagree with what I just said before we move the conversation going forward.
Well, I think you're raising a fascinating point. I'll try not to belabor it. The fact is that Judaism from its inception, Barry, had this kind of, I don't want to call it schizophrenic, it would be too harsh, but this kind of divided view of itself and the world. On the one hand, we are a nation, a people, as you indicated, indigenous to the land of Israel, where the land of Israel dictates our religious observance, our whole identity as a people, and I fully agree with that. On the other hand, there is another stream in Judaism that is reflected in the words of many of our prophets, which is also very ancient, and which is very much universalistic in its focus, and not so parochially oriented as the first side is. And these two aspects of Jewish existence have been colliding and intermixing and interacting with one another for the entire history of our Jewish people, for better and sometimes for worse. For example, on the Universalist side, we produce people like Karl Marx and socialism, communism. A lot of these were ideas that are born out of underlying threads of equality and so on that we see in our scriptures. And on the other hand, we had people that we produced that were extremely nationalistic in their point of view, and brought the people, for example, during the conflagrations around the time of the Second Temple, where they, according to our own scriptures, our own Talmud, the temple was destroyed because of the hostility between within the Jewish people between the various groups and sects. So I as a 21st century heir to the Jewish tradition acknowledge these two things, but we need to achieve a balance. On the one hand, we especially are those of us who are privileged to witness and live in the Jewish state, the first Jewish Commonwealth in over 2,000 years. I mean, that the birth of the state of Israel, according to what many think, is the Tzmichat Reshit Geulatenu. It's the very beginning of the final redemption, because we have a Jewish state. On the other hand, there are many in the ultra-Orthodox community, the Haredi community, who look at that very differently than we do. On the Universalist side, you have these streams like J Street and the Students for Palestine, and going around participating in these rallies that are completely misguided and have lost all sense of proportion and their connection to the Jewish values that you described. So what I hope, and my dream is that we as a Jewish people will learn to overcome those divisive forces within. Let me just tell you, during the height of the Holocaust, I'm a student of the Holocaust. I'm litigating a major Holocaust case in the U.S. Supreme Court now. At the height of the Holocaust, at the very moment that the Warsaw Ghetto uprising occurred, that the Jewish organizations within the Warsaw Ghetto were fighting each other and denying each other weapons and so on, while the Nazis were standing outside ready to kill all of them. And we have something similar happening today in Israel. Okay, lahavdil. I don't want to make a comparison, but in Israel today, you have people who are going out and protesting night after night in the streets of Tel Aviv and some other places, demanding that the government agree to a ceasefire in Gaza and so on, in order to get the hostages released and so on, and bring down the government. And we had, even before October 7th, we were all fighting at each other's necks about judicial reform. And the enemies of Israel were looking on, just as those people were at the time of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. They wanted to destroy us, and did in fact destroy 6 million of us. Those people are now in places like Egypt and Gaza and Lebanon and Syria, Iran. They're all looking at us and seeing the fighting within us, and trying now. I believe October 7th occurred because of this. Many of them thought, because we were so divided as a nation in our own land, they could simply come in and do all the horrific things that they did to us on October 7th and the Gaza envelope and in the Nova Festival in Sderot and so on. So this is something, and now, on the other hand, look, that kind of tension within the country is okay, in the sense we are a democracy. We value free speech. We wanted people to be able to express their ideas, but we've got to also find the right balance. We have to use, like Donald Trump says, common sense when we carry out these national dialogues. They need to be dialogues and not, and not internal warfare. Okay, that's what it needs to be. We need to find a balance. So that's my answer to your question, your observation, Barry. I agree with you, and I just kind of modified it or expanded it to give a kind of a broader perspective to these forces that are operating within the Jewish nation both in the United States and in Israel today.
Well, I'd like to bring what you use, the example you gave here about the Warsaw Ghetto, round to relationships between us and the United States. And one of the issues that troubles me, and I've been talking and writing about it a lot, and it should affect what I'm about to say, you personally, based on what you live, is that my point about why people, Jews in particular, America, should vote this time, particularly for Republican president, is based on the fact of the executive orders that have been placed on Jews living in Judea and Samaria, Jews living near you, Mark, executive orders that are punishing for Jews living in Judea and Samaria by the Biden-Harris administration, while they are ignoring the hundreds of terrorists who have already killed Israelis, and I am not talking about Hamas in Gaza. I'm talking about Palestinian Arabs living in Judea and Samaria, close to you and close to me over here. And I live in Netanya, 25 minutes drive away from here is still Tulkarem, right? But I haven't seen any executive orders coming from Harris nor Biden against the terrorists individually and by name, whether it's the Hamas or whether it's Islamic Jihad, and we have those not only in Gaza, we have them in the areas where you're living, we're very close to me as well. But no executive orders have been done against them, and no executive orders have come from a Democrat Biden-Harris administration against Mahmoud Abbas, who has received millions of dollars from the US administration, and despite the Taylor Force Act, has given that money as a reward payment for Palestinians who have killed Jews, irrespective of whether they voted Fatah in his party or whether they vote Hamas against his own party. And they give them according to the number of Jews that they've killed. And yet this administration, this Democrat administration, has not brought zero executive orders, punishing executive orders against these people, only on individual Jews living in Judea and Samaria. I don't know if you have anything to add about that.
I have a lot to add about that. So first, let me start off and give a very, just kind of correct the record a little bit. They're not executive orders. There's one. Executive order number 14115, issued by President Biden on February 1st, 2024, which is aimed solely at Israelis, particularly those living in Judea and Samaria, but really anyone who opposes the American administration's position on a two-state solution in Judea and Samaria, what some people call the West Bank. And I am not only aware of the executive order, I'm one of, organized a group of lawyers in Israel and in the United States to challenge the constitutionality and the legality of that executive order, pursuant to which, and this is what I think you were referring to, the Biden administration has issued sanctions under that executive order against many individuals, and not only individuals, also against organizations, nonprofit organizations like and even groups that are not technically organized, like the Tzav-9. Tzav-9 were a group of people, some 15,000 people in Israel, who were protesting the delivery of what was called humanitarian aid to Hamas in Gaza, because Hamas was taking it and not giving it to the people. And they protested by lying on the streets and interrupting these trucks that were bringing this aid into Gaza. They've been sanctioned. You know, farmers, Jewish farmers in Judea and Samaria, like Yinon Levy and others, who have been raising their crops and their livestock on land in accordance with Israeli law and with under the direct guidance and support of the Israeli police, the army, the Shin Bet, and the government, and yet they have been subjected now to sanctions. Just the other day, a young man in Samaria, in the village of Yitzhar, Levi Yitzchak Pilant, was sanctioned for supposedly throwing Palestinians off their land. Well, it turns out that he was an IDF soldier carrying out his duty to keep the peace in the area in which he lives as a fully deputized, authorized member of the IDF reserves. They've sanctioned him and the organization, another organization called Hashomer Yosh, which I supported and as a donor and as a lawyer over the years. They've been sanctioned because they did the horrible thing of defending Jewish property against theft and destruction by Palestinian Arabs. And now it gets to your point, that you're making an excellent point, that all of these sanctions have been going on and being applied to Jewish individuals and army soldiers and organizations in violation of American constitutional guarantees like free speech and free exercise of religion. And nothing has been done to the Palestinian Arabs, okay, who've been carrying out dozens more or several times more of criminal activity, violent activity against Jews in Judea and Samaria and all over Israel. That's exactly right. And the lawsuit, we've actually filed a lawsuit now in Texas, in Dallas, Texas, here in a place called Amarillo, where we have raised a whole battery of constitutional and other arguments against the legality and the validity of Executive Order 14115. And we're about to do another one, I hope, in another jurisdiction where we'll raise additional issues on behalf of other plaintiffs. And it's my hope that these lawsuits will become a topic of discussion in connection with the current discourse that's going on in advance of the November elections and afterwards, to make sure that we fight these intrusions upon these unfair, inequitable, illegal intrusions upon the rights of Jews in Judea and Samaria, where the very heartland of the Jewish people, where the indigenous Jewish people had its birthplace, and to take and to put this executive order and the sanctions that have been issued under it into the dustbin of history. That's what we're working on. And anybody out there that wants to have more information about it can contact Barry, and I will be glad to share with you the complaint that we filed in the case and the op-ed pieces that have appeared in such publications as the Wall Street Journal. Another lengthy discussion or answer to your question, Barry, but I hope it was responsive.
Yes, but also I'd like to, on a legal matter, I'd like to raise this point, and please add in what you have to say, that we see Biden-Harris bringing these punishments against Israel, Jews, we want to call it, without any repercussions on the actual killers, the Palestinians, under the Palestinian Authority, despite the fact there is something, I understand it's still in force, the Taylor Force Act, which I think you know about. So you tell us who Taylor Force is or was, and explain to me. I cannot get my head around it on why they're punishing the Jews and yet doing nothing against the Palestinian killers who are killing Jews. Well, and this ought to appeal to any sensitive Jewish voter in America right now.
You would think. You would think so, Barry.
I see an unintended, let me put it, say unintended anti-Semitism behind the dichotomy of the two things.
No, it's exactly anti-Semitic, and it's wrong. The Harris-Biden administration, immediately after it took office, canceled a whole series of Trump administration policies, including the decision not to enforce the Taylor Force Act, which forbade the United States from providing any kind of assistance or foreign aid to organizations that, like the Palestinian Authority, like Hamas, like UNRWA, the United Nations Refugee Welfare Agency, which runs all of these schools and social institutions in the Gaza Strip. When they pay or support the persons or families of relatives of persons who are engaging what's called pay for slay, hiring people to kill Jews. The American law forbids that. The Biden administration has refused to enforce that law or to abide by it, itself violating the law. And in addition to that, one of the things that the Trump administration did, by the end, it had ceased all subsidization, U.S. aid to Palestinian organizations like the Palestinian Authority, the Hamas, and so on, to the tune of close to $1 billion a year, and UNRWA. And because of what they were doing in terms of harming American citizens and others and supporting terror against the Jewish people. When Biden and Harris came in, they canceled all of those restrictions and started turning on the faucets of monetary support for these Palestinian organizations directly and indirectly into the hands of Hamas, UNRWA, the Palestinian Authority, and so on, without any regard to the horrible acts that these terror organizations and international institutions supporting them were doing in support of terror against innocent Jews. So that's a very important point, Barry. Now you ask, why are the Jews doing this in America? Why are they continuing to vote for candidates who support this, who support the protests, the anti-Semitic protests that are going on in college campuses and all over the United States? All I can say is it's irrational, and it's a kind of political inertia that the Jews have it in their heads that they can only vote for Democrats and that to vote for Republicans, particularly a Republican like Donald Trump, who's so outspoken, who they don't like. They may not like his demeanor or his way of expressing himself, but you cannot deny that Donald Trump was acting for the benefit of the American people and the Jewish people and the people of those of us here in the state of Israel, did more for all of those than any president prior to his administration. And then having these undemocratically appointed candidates, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, who support the other extreme, the anti-Israel, anti-Zionist, anti-Jewish part of the community, the international community, the ideas, and the Jews are still supporting them, 72% according to the last poll. It's I don't have an explanation for it. I wish I could convince them to vote otherwise, but from my own experience, Barry, it's not worth the time to try. We're going to focus on the 500,000 of us that are here in Israel and the millions upon millions of Americans who love Israel, who are the friends of the Jewish people across the United States, who value the support that President Trump and the Republican Party is showing for the Jewish people and for those of us here in Israel, and for the other common sense ideas that we are advocating, the party is advocating. Those people I'm turning to and asking, I hope many of them are watching your podcast, Barry, because those are the people that we can encourage. They just need to get up and vote. I know that if they do that, if they get up, they register, they vote, either in person or by early voting or by absentee ballots or whatever it is in the United States, the millions of them, they can change the course of history, save the United States, save the Jewish people, save the state of Israel, and quite honestly, Barry, save the world.
Well, I was here in Israel. Obviously, I made Aliyah from Britain, and I remember writing and speaking about 15 or so years ago when the British Labour Party became taken over by Jeremy Corbyn, who exposed not only his anti-Israel bias, pro-Palestinian bias, but also his anti-Semitism, because his party became drenched in anti-Semitism, even as he went to Tunis to lay a wreath at the grave of one of the leaders of the Fatah terror organization, but his party became so drenched from parliament into branch office with anti-Semitism that in fact many Labour Party members of parliament, I'm not talking about just Jewish here, also non-Jewish members of parliament who had been in parliament for the Labour Party for 30 or 40 years, resigned their party membership and resigned their seat in the parliament. And I remember writing and saying at that time, this form of political anti-Semitism dressed up as anti-Israelism or anti-Zionism is going to leap across the pond, and it will find a receptive home in one of the political parties in America. I, at that time, didn't know whether it was going to be the far right of the Republican Party or the Democrat Party, but I took a guess. It would be the Democrat Party that lurches to the left. And I actually see this happening, and it scares me to death. So my last provocative question to you, Marcus, last question is, why should Americans vote for Donald Trump as president rather than Kamala Harris?
Well, listen, I'll first answer that question as a Jew and Israeli, okay, and then I'll answer it as an American generally. The reason we need that Americans need to vote for Donald Trump and not for Kamala Harris is that the Trump administration has proven, the Republican Party has proven incontrovertibly that they are in favor of the values, the Judeo-Christian values that underlie both Israeli society and American society. They have also committed themselves explicitly to defeating the evil that is represented by Hamas and the Hezbollah in the north, and understand that Israel is fighting an existential battle against forces that led primarily and coordinated by Iran aimed at nothing short of destroying the Jewish state. That's the first thing. As an American Jew, I note that, for example, the Trump administration inserted anti-Semitism into Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, protecting Jewish students on university campuses, and to throw up a defensive bulwark against the kinds of horrible anti-Semitic actions that are occurring on college campuses, at the pains of denying federal assistance to universities who do not adequately protect their Jewish students. And then I will also say that as an American, Barry, there's something that's really gone haywire in American society as a whole. I left the United States a proud American in 1986. I still remain a proud American, but I don't know what's happened to the country. This craziness that's gone on about family, the destruction of family values, the destruction of the differences, the natural differences between men and women, the attack on our constitutional institutions like the Electoral College, the Supreme Court, the filibuster rule in the United States Senate, the whole idea of electoral votes to pick the president, and this crazy preoccupation with the problem, the events of January 6th, the election of Soros type district attorneys and secretaries of state across the United States who openly destroying the criminal justice system and letting criminals go out free or without bail, in destroying our cities. This incredible decision to completely open the southern border, in fact, all borders of the United States to illegal immigration, with the apparent purpose of simply distorting the demographic balance in the United States in order to grant the Democratic Party the ability to perpetuate its rule for all time by naturalizing millions upon millions of illegal immigrants, many of whom are committing the most vile crimes against American citizens, the discrimination against our veterans, the decision to dismantle the United States' ability to produce its own energy and to become energy independent, indeed energy dominant, and the damage that has caused to the economy. This decision to spend trillions of dollars and to pump it into the U.S. Economy, resulting in this out of control inflation that is affecting negatively the lives of so many people in the United States today, and then of course all of the damage that the highest Biden administration has done to the foreign policy of the United States, weakening our military, getting us involved in crazy disputes around the world because our enemies perceive the United States as being weak and vulnerable. So I could go on. We don't have time. Those are all the reasons why I think any reasonable person today, regardless of how you may have voted in the past, should vote for Donald Trump, despite what you may think about his personality. But his policies, in my view, are unassailable and correct and make fundamental common sense. That's what we need to get back. The world is hungry for America to return to its roots and to become strong again. Because if we keep it this way, Barry, we are lost as a people, as the state of Israel, and as a human community in the world.
My final take on this is that when I look at what's happening on the streets of America and on the campuses, I have to say this chaos, this anti-Semitism is not being performed by people on the far right. It's the radical left and the jihadists and the Islamists in America who are overpowering both the campuses and the streets in their numbers. And quite frankly, this radical left and the jihadists and Islamists are certainly not going to be voting Republican. They were going to find their political home in the Democrat Party. And that should be a wake-up call for anybody with any common sense remaining in the Democrat Party. If people like, for instance, our lawyer, Dershowitz has deserted the party of his birth, the Democrat Party, and other people like that. It's really deserving on
Robert Kennedy, Tulsi Gabbard, incredible. You're right, Barry.
Well, you mentioned Kennedy, and what people are not mentioning in America, where they talk about Kennedy, they talk about him as being an independent, which he was, and now he seems to be coalescing with Trump, should Trump become a president. But I have to remind people, and I have never seen it in the media in America, and I would remind them of who is it that killed his father. It was a Palestinian, Sirhan killed Kennedy's father. Right. And Sirhan is still alive and well and living in an American prison. And yet your media over there in America didn't cover that fact. I wonder why.
Yeah.
Because your present administration is supporting the Palestinians over Israel right now.
And listen to what Robert Kennedy has to say about Gaza and what we should do there. It's very, very powerful. Anyway, listen, Barry, I think you're amazing. I want to tell you, I have the greatest regard for your work and your knowledge and your commitment and your passion. And I want to thank you very much for having me on your program.
I let you go. Want to invite you back on my show post-election to give your remarks or inquest or whatever. And I have a prediction or premonition, which I'm not going to say on air. I'll do it with you privately, but I'll mention it now because I hope if I'm right or wrong, I will discuss it open with you after the election. But first of all, Mark, thank you very much for being my guest. I hope the information you've given has been informative to any Americans who are living outside the United States, whether in Israel or somewhere else, on how to vote and get your vote in, because democracy demands your active participation. Mark, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Barry. God bless you. Besorot tovot.
And this is Barry Shaw, The View from Israel. אנחנו מכריזים לזאת